high prices of imported oil. But the other, they are sources of bad publicity, but do not have fiscal impact anywhere close to what we're talking about election. So if you want to focus in terms of real impact, it has to be first to get election right. So public sector entities of a certain sort, they have been continuing. Again, if you see now there have new managements have been introduced in these, but at least the damage has been done in terms of bad publicity, and one can, I think, gracefully accept it. An area, I think, where we have done, again, to go back and forth, where we have made a serious effort. And again, this will be something over the next 5 years which will have possibly dramatic effects on the region, is that we have opened up the nature of our relationships in the region. We have reached out and tried to put ancient rivalries aside, open up our relationships with India on the trade side. We have had a new Afghan transit trade agreement, and we feel that over a period of time, hopefully sooner rather than later, this will change the dynamics of our region. And I think multi-country projects can take place. It could be a source of, it will be a new avenue for international investors to come in and to promote trade and investment and bring associated improvements in the quality of life of our citizens. Similarly, we have tried our best to make it easy for our businesses to operate. And you saw that the year before last, we had our exports reached 25+ million, but 28% growth in exports at a time when the global crisis was still with us and continues to be with us. And we tried very hard to get access to European markets, which we have now secured. Hopefully that will also add up to some of this. We went and made special efforts. I think the governor at the State Bank is here. He can talk more about that, to bring remittances through official channels. And what used to be $6 billion per year is now reaching $13 billion per year. Again, I think something we cannot be entirely dismissive of as an achievement. So, going forward now, the question, look, if you are trying, the first and foremost thing is, if you look at the history of why some countries have gotten ahead and others haven't, let's pose that question. Because we cannot try and think something out of the blue, right? This institution, which is a financial institution, but also a knowledge institution, I think, when I used to be here, this question was discussed all the time. Why did some people get ahead and others were left behind? In the 40s, 50s, we were all coming out of the shadows of colonialism, and the great powers were coming out of the shadows of the Second World War. And then some countries like Singapore, which were a malarial swamp, with per capita income of 30,000, and others remained at 3,000, some even less. So what happened? Well, typically, I think as a student of economics, there were 3 or 4 features that separated those who got ahead from those that were left. Number 1, countries that invested in their people got ahead, others were left. So you cannot have a developed country with underdeveloped country. This is a big lesson going forward. Number 2, countries that found a way to sell their products to others got ahead, those that could not were left behind. So exports, international partnerships, global mainstream, alliance making. 3 countries, and in the 20th century, at least 70 to 80 countries tried this one, that relied exclusively or primarily upon governments got ahead and didn't go ahead, and those that relied on a good mix or primarily relied upon the private sector got ahead. So, in a broad sense then, we know what to do. Right? We have to invest much more in our people, whether it is in terms of education or skills or their physical well-being, insulating them from diseases and all that. I feel that as far as financial support for those projects, those programs is concerned, this government has made a good start. We need to build upon it. Second, we need resources to do that. So clearly, on the one hand, we have to ensure that we design incentives in the right way. And second, that we mobilize our taxes. As I said, we took really difficult decisions to eliminate zero ratings on domestic sales of textiles and carpets and leather, surgical equipment and sport goods. These are very powerful features, but we did. Similarly, we eliminated exemptions from fertilizer and agriculture products, and pesticides, and everything except for basic foods and health-related items, and education material. And I can tell you there's a lot of resistance to that. But those things are paying off now. What we need to do this year, which I think the Chairman FDR is here, he can talk to you about that, is to expand the scope of income tax. And we have tried hard also to simplify it. We have tried to preempt the criticism that we are burdening the very people who pay taxes. In the last 3 years, we have benefited almost every single honest taxpayer. And the tax rates have been brought down for all those who are not in the highest tax category. Every single taxpayer in Pakistan, his tax rate has been brought down, except the ones in the highest tax, which are very few. We wanted to reward those who were doing their job and paying taxes. Similarly, the tax slabs used to be 17. We simplified them to 7. The limit for exemption of tax paying used to be 100,000. If you made 100,000 rupees a year, 8,000 rupees a month, you had to pay taxes, income tax. We eliminated that and gave relief to a lot of lower middle class people. And now you have to pay tax only if you pay something like 30,000 a month. Similarly, we did not increase custom duties, we reformed them, we brought them down for many, many products. We just want to have a simple sales tax, and a simple income tax, and that's it. There were special duties on hundreds of products, we eliminated. There were regulatory duties on 397 products, we eliminated on 392. So I think this is obviously an area we need to think about, which is tax mobilization. And I'd like to welcome thoughts from you on how to. The third area I think is clearly how to design a structure of subsidies that is sustainable and that is well targeted. And it goes to the larger area of thinking about the role of the state. Because I feel that the size of the government, and there are 5 governments operating in Pakistan, has become way too large. And we need to figure out, have a national discourse on how can we control the size of government from continuing to get larger and larger and larger in at least 5 places. And we also, for the 5th thing I want to say is we have to rethink on how to have a format, how to have a forum for aligning the national economic interests with the policies of the provincial governments and the federal government. Because now the Chief Minister of Punjab has more resources than the Prime Minister of Pakistan. And that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing in provinces. But we need to ensure, again, that there isn't a race between provinces on who can spend quicker, while not bothering to mobilize resources or taxes from sources of agriculture, from professional tax, from regulatory duties, from stamp, so whatever. So that's another important area we need to think about. Of course, there are aspects of the securities market which we try to tackle, and we introduced capital gains tax. Again, a very powerful group which nobody had touched before. And we have tried to bring more transparency in the stock market. That I said, virtually dormant, is now, as some of you may know, it is the best performing stock market in the entire world for this year. Again, something perhaps not readily recognized or known but not talked about. And this is bringing a new set of players to come into Pakistan. And I think over a period of time, it will highlight opportunities that are there in our stock market and how to mobilize it. So I think there's a lot of other stuff, but I maybe have already spoken more than I should have, and I'll give you.
Thank you very much, Hafiz Saab. This is indeed a very illuminating and comprehensive overview. And frankly, for the first time, I've seen this all put together so tightly. So thank you for that. I think we're ready to open up and get some questions from the floor. So if you have questions, please raise your hand. And if you can just identify yourself and keep your questions brief so that we can accommodate as many questions as possible. Thank you.
Yes. Mudassir Imran is mine in the energy sector. Thank you, Mr. Minister. I mean, this was extraordinary to listen to you. I think that you put it very nicely together. And rarely you see in the World Bank meeting that people don't stop and ask questions in the middle. So your speech was so mesmerizing that we did with that. And secondly, let me also thank you especially for your last discussion when you were here, where you very nicely, articulated and clarified the whole issue of the circular debt. And so that was a very enlightening for a lot of people, but not only into the power sector. Let me come to the power sector, and that is basically where my area of expertise is. You talked about the circular debt the last time. That's a pity that not much has happened since then. And it's been a blame game, the pointing fingers, and you were very candid about it last time. But I mean, the power sector the issues also have a political economy dynamic, and you know that more than anybody else does. And there are lots of big governance issues, and which require this political will. In many countries where have these power sector issues, one of the first things you look at is basically to look at the non-commercial losses, and there are ways to correct so that the losses, and that is where you have the political will. And that has to deal with looking mostly to with that. And the second is basically on the oil and the balance of payment impact and the billions of dollars that we have spent. There's two things to look at. One is on the procurement of oil. Normally, in countries which have this problem, is that the spot market prices are much higher, and when you go into long-term contracts, and you see the oil market traditionally has been in backwardation. So basically the price of when you lock in prices, basically through some kind of contract, basically you get a much better deal. So look, I'll just stop here, but I'm available to talk.
Okay, thank you, Nasir. We take 2 or 3 questions and then the minister. Straight up.
My name is Sayyid. My area is also energy, especially on power. So I would raise this question that I was raising for some time, that with the potential of hydropower in Pakistan, we are not moving in any case. I believe to the situation. Whatever is existing is already moving on in terms of situation. On hydropower, this issue has been emphasized, and everybody knows that this is the backbone of our sector. You know, this cannot move forward. We need to get backwards. But I've seen, last few years, there has been no development in hydropower per se, except a few additional wells on the existing dam, but they are already starting with potential. The Twitter 2 dams which I've heard about, Pasha and the second one is Mudar. If I put the best of the both together, I would say that we have in Pakistan at this time an existing project which we are ignoring. And Trade Board, which has all its things in order, to give you a sustained power. And we are not giving it. I know what the reasons are, but I would say that whatever those reasons are, those could be addressed by depoliticizing. You can perhaps change the name of the dam, change the location, but not show that it's different location than you. Give the power potential increase in hands of non-Punjabis, because that's your judgment. And why can't we move forward in that? Why can't we criticize it otherwise?
Okay.
Why can't we move?
Thank you. Thank you. We'll take one more question. Please keep it short. We are running out of time.
Yeah, but in the same way, you should also do the port. You should build the port. I'm sorry.
Okay, Ali.
My question for the governor. Some have observed that the government has stopped financing its deficit from the central bank, but has moved to doing it from the banks, commercial banks. The question is if there is, does this pose risks to the banking system in the medium term, depending on how the government deals with its debt? And also, what has it meant for the private sector, the credit to the private sector?
Okay, I think we'll stop there for the first round. We'll come back for another quick round. So, Shaisab, if you can come.
Okay, I think with this Imran Saab's question about circular debt, it's a fact of life. Circular debt, as I had also mentioned last time, the electricity companies, they have receivables and they have payables, right? The people they need to pay, they have to pay. Otherwise, they really complain. But the people that owe them money, they don't do a good job of collecting from them. And the difference between them is circular debt. About your point that nothing has been done, actually a lot has been done. The $16 billion I talked about is, partly going into that. Because when the companies don't collect, the electricity companies, but they have to pay, suppliers of oil or the IPPs and so on, somebody has to come in. Who is that? Mr. Wajid Rana, the finance secretary, right? And, but it's not a sustainable, solution. You cannot keep on, filling the gap, which we often do. But it resurfaces because circular debt is not a problem, it's a symptom of an underlying problem. So we have to fix the underlying problem and not simply keep dishing out money and I think your point is a good one, I recognize that. About the procurement of oil, I think that's a very interesting point, and we'd like to get your thoughts on that. If you've done any kind of research on it or any paper on it, we'd like to take it. And I think it's an area we are engaged with ourselves. So, but it's definitely something that we would like. What is the right way to go about acquiring oil, right? And is there a scope? I think that, the better informed people know these things. I have begun to get more and more involved in this issue because we have to keep paying our own oil company huge amounts because they supply to the electricity company. So I think that's an important area of potential intervention. On the energy, Saeed Rana Saab's point, I think that there are people here who know much more about what's going on in the hydropower, sector. And as far as, and they can share it with you, On the issue of Tamir Bhasha, even just now we have been talking to the US government to secure their support, and they have, agreed to support it. Obviously, it will happen in a long period of time, but at least the beginning has been made, and we have been talking to the Asian Development Bank and so on. So that's going to materialize, but of course it will take, a long time, 7 years, 10 years, whatever. On Calabar Dam, it's hard to depoliticize things which politics is a fact of life, right? How does one go about depoliticizing something that's already become political? If there is a way to do it, let's talk about it. All I know is that nobody in Pakistan representing any political party is for it. So it's a formidable proposition. And, General Musharraf, when he was the ultimate ruler of Pakistan, could not get a single hand-picked provincial government of his to say they are for it. Chief ministers who were nobodies and appointed chief ministers by him who didn't even do it. So I agree with you, but when you are in a federation and when you have legislatures and all these things, then I think that's the mechanism through which such kind of decision-making takes place. But as a citizen of Pakistan, I think you have the right and indeed also ability to galvanize opinion for the project. And I think, maybe you'll succeed. The other question, I think, maybe you can answer.
Question on private sector credit. You have to understand the backdrop of how and why private sector credit is constrained as it has been. It's not unique to Pakistan. It's a global phenomenon, as you know. Two areas, reasons why this has happened. One is global financial crisis, of course, triggered off a whole attitude of risk averseness amongst the banking sector, not only here, but in the United States as well. As you know, there's a lot of liquidity being pumped in by the Federal Reserve, but where is it going? It's not going to the private sector. It's going back to the banks and to treasuries. That's exactly what's been happening in other parts of the world too. Those that have been affected by it. These exogenous shocks have been felt in Pakistan also. Secondly, you had a high interest rate environment. Interest rates of about 14, 15, 16%. What is the natural reaction of any banker? If you're a banker running a bank, what would you do? You'd be risk averse. You have the exposure to exogenous shocks impacting on your exporters of textiles and what have you, because your markets are slowing down in the overseas markets, right? So you have collapse of certain industries, you're not going to be lending to that sector, you're risk averse. So what better than lend to a risk averse product like treasuries? You have ease. So if you're CEO, you put all your eggs in one basket, in this case, get the rate returns of 15–16%, and sit on your seat and get a big fat bonus at the end of the year. That's the attitude that most bankers have. Now, that is obviously the cornerstone for any stimulant of an economy. Aggregate demand gets depressed and so forth, so we should circle. What have we tried to do in terms of this challenging environment over the last few years is that we obviously have been battling with inflation for reasons as have already been cited. We brought the interest rates down last year by 200 basis points, another 200 basis points this year. This 400 basis point has brought it down to 10%, and the inflation rate has come down to single digits now. That has helped ease the pressure on borrowing for many of the customers. You could ask, why don't you just mandate the banks to lend? They said, well, yeah, we could during the nationalized era. We had directed lending, but we went through the Bank Reforms Act in the 90s when you have 85% swing of national assets to private assets to what you have today. Well, you want to go back to that era? You can't do that to the private sector. The moment you do that, you're going to have the private sector investors like the Aghan and others that are investors in the banking sector fund. Because that's not what they're there for. You ask a question, but India does it. Because India has 70% of their assets, their banking assets, and national assets. They had direct lending to agriculture and what have you. We adopted the position. We're not going to do that. So we have to take other monetary policy instruments and try and stimulate that. Now, what we have done is, raise the bar, the ceiling on some deposit savings deposits up to 6%, and the rates have come down to 10%. Now that gives the redirection of the banking sector. Look, you've got to look at long-term alternatives, because obviously shareholders look at long-term, and directorship, although CEOs may not, look at short-term. So we've sent a strong message that you must rationalize your strategy and look at the areas that will give you those kinds of commensurate returns without incurring the kind of business that you're supposed to be doing as a banker. Some banks have 50–60% of their balance sheet in these kinds of instruments. So, but there is evidence in the last few months that shows that there is some shift in the private in the SME area, which we've been pushing pretty deep. We've got incentive programs to encourage that area. There's other UK aid has been supporting some programs that help the sector. So by and large, there is a shift taking place. Yes, government borrowing has been from the commercial banks, but it's shifting gradually more to the central bank. And you find that that strategy is working and will work in due course as this particular trend takes place. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. Thank you. I think we can do one more round of questions. So, if we...
Yes, thank you, Sarah Qureshi, Consultant Bank. Just two quick questions. You talked about health and education being made provincial subjects now. On the one hand, we have legislation being passed like this Compulsory Education Act that was recently promulgated. So if these are provincial subjects, if you could just clarify how this can be enforced. So how are the provinces going to be made, if they're going to act totally independently, how will they be made to kind of actually implement this and make sure that every kid gets to school and has a certain minimum allocation to these sectors, which so far has not happened because they have minimum allocation. And another quick question, I'm not a banker and I don't belong to the banking sector, but I have done some work in micro and SME, and I just wondered, we've heard a lot about, we keep hearing SME, small and medium enterprises are the backbone and the engine of any economy, and yet somehow in Pakistan, this particular area has not received perhaps as much attention as it should have. We've seen SME lending go down. The banks are not very comfortable. We have the microfinance banks, but the regular commercial banks are not very comfortable with lending to SMEs. um, you have all the figures in front of you, so I'm not going to repeat all of that, but is there anything there that can boost this particular sector, given how important it is for any economy?
Okay, there's a question there.
Yes. My name is Taki Sharif, a bank retiree, who has recently worked as a consultant with the bank on the tax administration reform project in Pakistan. And Mr. Sheikh, my basic question is that one of the points that you raised was on tax mobilization. But having worked there for 2 years, I mean, one of the things that I saw at least was that if FBR cannot be made autonomous, at a minimum, what you need is security of tenure of senior management at the FBR, and even at the mid-management level. There are so many rapid changes there. I mean, the chairman is there for barely a year, 18 months. I mean, during the STAR project, there were, I think, 5 or 6 chairmen. Then the members who are appointed to the FBR, they are generally 1 or 2 years away from retirement. We are now in the 21st century, and you know, FBR has been completely computerized. And as you know, on the manufacturing sector, all the returns have been filed electronically. So why can't all the parties agree on the security of tenure of the chairman of FBR for a period of 4 to 5 years? Everybody sets the targets based on a tax policy unit in the Ministry of Finance, etc., rather than on an arbitrary basis. And then set the goals and targets, and then give them the incentives to perform. That's it.
Okay, another question.
My name is Björn Hamsel. I'm managing a new project to reduce unaccountable for gas in Southern territory in Balochistan. Minister, I wonder whether you would consider to liberalize the gas market in Pakistan. The reason why I'm asking is that I'm somewhat concerned about all the schemes to import gas, LNG or pipeline gas. You may need it, but it's hard to do it. But shouldn't you first try to exploit the domestic resources of gas efficiently? I think if you liberalize the gas market, you will get optimum level of production domestically, and the gas will flow to where the price is the highest and the value for the country is the highest. I think you could achieve a tremendous results after doing that. Is that something that could be considered as a political interest?
By liberalize, you mean what?
I mean that producers would be and traders would be able to sell gas directly to large industry and gradually to larger parts of the market. You could still protect your selection. Prices would probably flow upwards, but
There's one more question, and that's will have to be the last question.
Zahid Hasnain. On education, I think the main problem with education, my understanding is, it's not so much money. Of course, there are limitations on funding, but it's really governance. I mean, I think governance of teachers probably rivals that of tax as a real challenge. And pouring money into the system alone is not going to solve the problem. I mean, the problems of teacher recruitment, politicization, transfers, these are very, very difficult to fix. But we do have some success stories in Pakistan from public-private partnerships. In fact, in Sindh, where public financing but private service delivery through NGOs and them managing schools has had some significant impacts on student learning outcomes, on enrollment. In fact, there's scientific evidence of this. Is there any thinking about, in terms of education policy, of moving away from the public service delivery model to more effective partnerships with the private sector, at least for new schools and for expanding enrollment? Because I think that is, I think in terms of solving the governance problem, that to me strikes me as having high potential, and we have some evidence to it. Thanks.
I think I'll react to some, and then if PR and governor I had Wazir Saab mention in reaction to Sayyidina bit about the hydropower and so forth. So we don't want to leave him feeling we didn't react. Okay, Qureshi Sahib, I think on your question, look, this whole 18th Amendment, right, where 18 ministries have been transferred to the provinces, it's a kind of a work in progress, right? It's just been done, and there are some loose ends, and one is trying to figure out, the ultimate shape of things. there is a interprovincial coordination body that is set up primarily to do this with the ministry. And the Council of Common Interest, which is headed by the Prime Minister and has all the 4 chief ministers, is looking at some of these things. Now, after these 2 ministries were passed to the provinces, there was this big clamor that how do we deal with the rest of the world, right? If you go to meet Bill Gates and he says, I have this, I want to do, but he would talk to the Prime Minister or myself and say, okay, who is responsible for securing the outcomes, right? And we would have a bit of a dilemma there, because you can't drag 4 chief ministers to a meeting in Davos, for 10 minutes to meet. So this is the issue. How do you coordinate national outcomes where the matter has been transferred to the provinces? And I think you have to figure it out. It's not entirely figured out. So even though the education and health have been transferred, there are vertical programs in health which continue to be financed by the federal government. The Higher Education Commission continues to be financed by the federal government. You have NCHD, the National Commission for Human Development, and the National Education Foundation continuing to be financed. So I think these things will work themselves out, but I'm appreciative of the point you are making, and we need to respond swiftly to try and resolve this issue. And as far as your other point, I think the governor will address it. He's very keen to address it. He's telling me I want to talk about it. So I think the point about Mr. Sharif, I agree that there should be security of tenure, not just in FDR but in other ministries as well, because it's very disruptive. And my own proposal is we should have a period every year in which transfers should be made for anybody in Pakistan. And that should correspond with maybe 2 months before the school year begins. And then that's it, unless there's some extraordinary reason, so that people can, live their lives in a normal way and also insulate ourselves from the political pressure. But I want to tell you something, and also for the benefit of others, that this is a period where institutions have been allowed to function. And this again is something unique. The central bank governor is here, but I do not interfere in his affairs. And he's totally independent to, conduct monetary policy, and he has his own board. We may talk about it in the Fiscal and Monetary Coordination Board, which I had, and he gives his point of view and so on, but there is no arm twisting. Similarly, we have a Security Exchange Commission, and they perform their role independent. We don't call up. The finance secretary had some board, but we don't do that. Even the chairman FBR is here. He's the 4th chairman FBR I'm dealing with. I never tell them, about who to appoint, who to, transfer. Once in a rare while maybe, but never. And I think they can cooperate. And also let me say that the President and the Prime Minister of Pakistan do not tell me stuff about intervening into the affairs of these institutions. So a lot of stuff goes around in the, public domain, which I want to say, with as much authority, you know that I would not say anything in front of you that was not based on facts. That, this is a period where everybody is trying to function in their own domain without too much intrusiveness from their bosses or the political leadership. And I think, again, when the history of this period is written, perhaps these traditions will get recognized, which have been injected. And hopefully, as the literature now says, institutions today will be key. And I should add it to the 4th point. And I think in our own small way, we are trying to make that contribution. I think gas is a problematic sector, and it has not received the kind of attention that electricity has been. But it suffers from many of the same problems as electricity. It has been deprived of investment by artificially keeping the prices too low. It has therefore necessitated a communist-style quantity rationing, which bureaucracies do, and with imperfections, and it has exposed us to pressures from legitimate claimants from different sides, fertilizer, or textile, or domestic users, or electricity companies, and yeah. So we have tried to, begin to liberalize prices and allow them to rise, but we face a lot of difficulties, including from the courts. And so this is, I think, I can agree with the spirit of the question. I think that's the way that we should be headed. And I know that, the minister also would like to move in that direction, and we would like to support him in that. But it would have to be a gradual process. Hopefully after the elections, the government can take this forward. So about Zahid Saab's question, I think that's a good model. And frankly, it's the provincial sector's domain, but as far as we are concerned, we welcome private sector involvement in service delivery. And that would be just great. And there's Susan here, you can agree with that also. So, Governor Saab,
Thank you. I was raising my hand. You're absolutely right. The tune.
No more, tinkering with the interest rate.
There you go, no interference.
Here's the multiplier. That's another one. Instrument is ready called.
SME is an area that I've been advocating. It's an area that is an engine of growth for any economy. Employment, growth, what have you. It has not done well. 60s, 70s, 80s, California was the fourth or fifth largest economy in the world. Why? Because of three areas: SME, agriculture, and real estate. Okay. Who was the bank that perfected SME lending? Wells Fargo Bank. You need two key areas to ensure that SME lending is done properly. That's technology and documentation. Without that, you get your shirt burned. Okay. Banks in Pakistan have not mastered that as yet. They are beginning to. Okay. Secondly, why hasn't it picked up? That's one reason, because they have not mastered it. And fine, secondly, the alternative that they've had. They've had the luxury of investing in risk-averse instruments. The treasury of the that I talked about earlier. Therefore, there's got to be a gradual shift, because that's where the returns are made. The kind of returns they've been getting in the treasuries, now they're not going to be available. You can't use moral suasion, it just doesn't work. You've got to shift your gears to get the returns that you need from the business that you're supposed to be doing from this sector. And that sector is an area that we're building, capacity building, training and development. The medium-sized banks, particularly banks like NIB, which is Temasek, that shirt burned a little bit. Why? Because they replicate a model in Asia and try to put it back in Pakistan. It doesn't work that way. You've got to look at markets to market. One shoe size does not fit all at all. So you've got to look at a different market in a different sense. I used to do a lot of SME lending when I was in Cairo, Egypt for a couple of years. And you've got to look at your primary source of repayment as your cash flow. And secondly, your security. You've got to perfect your security interest in such a way that you have that as a secondary source. These are things that have to be put together properly, particularly the legal system as well. So a combination of these areas, we've been training and developing banks for the last couple of years. We've got UKA, DFID supporting this area as well. You've got other entities also. When I said, you've got some anecdotal evidence that shows that private sector credit is increasing. This is an area where it's going to increase. So the jury's still out. I know your question, why isn't it picking up? It will pick up in the coming years. Microfinance has. It's done very well. And we are the leaders, as you know, in branchless banking models. In fact, the Financial Times recently and the World Bank, CGAP, has recognized us as one of the leading nations in the world for this, ahead of the United States, ahead of the UK area. And we're being showcased around different markets about a branchless model. Why? Because that brings in financial inclusion, but that's a separate subject. But SME is concurrent with that, will help grow that economy with employment. And that's what we're pushing very aggressively with the banking sector. And gradually, as I said, you'll see some change there.
Was it some, you want to add something?
Two things. I think Sayyid Rana Sahib's point is well taken, and recognize his passion for hydropower. And he has been raising that issue and very rightly in many meetings that was addressed by you. And I think one of the key challenges on the supply side that we face in Pakistan is the shift in energy mix because of very high cost of power generation at the moment. And it's important to move towards the hydro to bring down the cost as well as to meet the supply side challenges. There are a number of hydro projects which are under implementation both in the public sector as well as in the private sector. In the public sector, we are implementing Legal Trailer, the Villa Ford extension, Jifar, Tibir, then Komuzam Dam, Satpara Dam, and in the private sector, the Korean company is implementing Patran Star Hydro and then Gare funded by IFC. So all combined together, they will sort of add up to 3,000 megawatt hydro. And then probably after a long gap, the Ministry of Water and Power and WAPDA has lined up a number of mega and small dam projects for raising funding from both the international market as well as the multilateral. That is called, one is the Ahmed Pasha, as the minister mentioned. Others you are well aware that Masood is working on DASU to be funded by the World Bank. Third is Munda. French Development Agency has agreed to sort of finance the feasibility and design Munda Dam with a 700 megawatts, and then North Waziristan Kurumtungi Dam, which is not only provide electricity for the local area need, but also sort of help in irrigating 300,000 acres of land, taking care of the local economy. Then we are trying to tap the potential of northern areas now called Gilgit and Baltistan, again with the assistance of French. We are implementing Jagran 1 and Jagran 2. And then there are a couple of small hydro projects in Skardu area. I mean, your point is well taken, but at the same time, there is the government do recognize that we have to move towards hydro projects in the medium and long term, and we are working on that. And on the issue raised by Sabra, I just want to add what the minister said. Through the 18th Amendment in Article 25A was inserted, making the universal education a state responsibility. That's part of the principles of policy and its intent of the government. And how provincial governments can be tied down to that kind of compulsory education. That has already been done by signing off a universal declaration through a different funded program of £500 million, where all the chief ministers are now signatories to implement that compulsory education, and that's being taken care of, as the minister mentioned, through the provincial budgets after the post-evolution.
That's it. I'd like to thank all of you for your patient hearing. Belatedly, I wanted to recognize our new Minister of State for Finance, Mr. Salim Mandiwala. Thank you for coming. So if we can now just wrap this up with a warm hand of applause for the speakers. Thank you very much.